Sometimes the highest honors are questioned by those who understand them least. In a world where cynicism often masquerades as wisdom, one defense attorney learned that assumptions about heroism can be shattered by the testimony of those who witnessed it firsthand. This is the story of a veteran whose greatest achievement was dismissed as fraud, until the men whose lives he saved stood up to tell the truth. What happened when his Medal of Honor was challenged would remind everyone in that courtroom that some sacrifices are so profound they echo through generations of gratitude. If stories like this restore your faith in genuine heroism and the bonds forged in the crucible of combat, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. This medal is fake. My client won't fall for this old man's fairy tales, said the lawyer in court. The veteran quietly placed the Medal of Honor on the table. Then 6 Navy SEALs in the gallery stood up and shouted, "He was our commander," and the lawyer's face turned white. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, please subscribe for more moments where genuine heroism meets cynical doubt, and where truth ultimately prevails over assumption. The Superior Court of San Diego County had seen its share of high-profile cases over the decades, but few had generated the kind of media attention and public interest surrounding Morrison versus Defense Contractors United. The modernized courtroom, with its polished oak benches and state-of-the-art audio-visual equipment, was packed beyond capacity, with reporters, legal observers, and family members whose lives had been forever changed by the events that had brought them all together. At the plaintiff's table sat Thomas Morrison, a 74-year-old, retired Navy commander whose weathered face told the story of a lifetime spent in service to his country. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he wore a simple black suit that had seen better days but remained dignified and appropriate for the solemn proceedings. Around his neck, suspended from a distinctive blue ribbon with white stars, hung the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration, awarded for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Morrison's case was both simple and complex, a wrongful death lawsuit against Defense Contractors United, the company whose faulty equipment had led to the deaths of 6 Navy SEALs during a classified operation 3 years earlier. The legal issues were straightforward: product liability, corporate negligence, and the responsibility of defense contractors to provide reliable equipment to military personnel operating in hostile environments. But the emotional and human dimensions of the case were far more complicated. Morrison wasn't just any witness or expert consultant. He was the commanding officer who had led the mission where the equipment failed, the leader who had made the split-second decisions that saved some lives while being unable to save others, and the veteran who had carried the weight of those losses every day since the operation ended. Across the aisle sat the defense team, led by Victoria Sterling, a 45-year-old partner at one of San Diego's most prestigious law firms. Sterling had built her reputation on aggressive defense tactics, meticulous preparation, and a willingness to challenge any evidence or testimony that threatened her client's interests. She was known for her ability to find weaknesses in opposing witnesses, discredit expert testimony, and create reasonable doubt, even in cases where the facts seemed overwhelming. Sterling had spent weeks preparing for this moment, researching Morrison's military record, analyzing his previous statements, and developing a strategy that would undermine his credibility as the plaintiff's key witness. In her view, Morrison was an aging veteran seeking financial compensation for a military operation that had gone wrong, using his Medal of Honor as a prop to gain sympathy from a jury that might be more impressed by military decorations than actual evidence. Her approach was both calculated and ruthless. If she could cast doubt on Morrison's heroism, question the circumstances surrounding his Medal of Honor, or suggest that he was exploiting his military record for personal gain, she might be able to neutralize the emotional impact of his testimony and focus the jury's attention on the technical aspects of the case, where her client had stronger arguments. Your Honor, Sterling began, as Morrison took the witness stand. Before Mr. Morrison provides his testimony, I believe the jury deserves to understand the context and credibility of the witness they're about to hear from. Judge Patricia Hayes, a former military prosecutor herself, looked up from her notes with obvious concern about where this line of questioning might lead. Proceed, counselor. But please remember that Mr. Morrison's service record speaks for itself. Sterling smiled with the confidence of someone who believed she had uncovered evidence that would change everything about how the court viewed Morrison's testimony. Your Honor, that's exactly my point. Mr. Morrison's alleged service record may not speak for itself at all. A murmur ran through the packed courtroom as reporters leaned forward, and family members of the fallen SEALs looked at each other with confusion and concern. Morrison remained calm in the witness chair, his hands folded in his lap, but his eyes showed the weariness of someone who had faced skepticism and doubt many times before. Mr. Morrison, Sterling continued, approaching the witness stand with theatrical confidence. You're wearing what appears to be a Medal of Honor around your neck. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am, Morrison replied quietly, his voice carrying the controlled tone of someone accustomed to formal proceedings and hostile questioning. And you expect this jury to believe that you, a man with no combat decorations listed in your official personnel file prior to 2019, somehow earned America's highest military honor at the age of 71. Morrison's attorney objected immediately. Your Honor, Sterling countered, Mr. Morrison's credibility is absolutely central to this case. If he's willing to misrepresent his military record to influence this jury, how can we trust any of his testimony about the events in question? Judge Hayes considered the objection for a long moment before ruling. I'll allow limited questioning about Mr. Morrison's qualifications as a witness. But, counselor, I expect you to connect this to the substantive issues in this case. Sterling nodded, sensing that she had successfully planted seeds of doubt in the jury's mind about Morrison's truthfulness and motivations. Morrison, isn't it true that you purchased this Medal of Honor from a military surplus store and are wearing it fraudulently to gain credibility with this jury? The accusation hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Reporters began typing frantically on their devices. Family members gasped audibly, and Morrison's own attorney rose halfway out of his seat before settling back down to observe his client's response. Morrison sat quietly for several moments, studying Sterling's face with the patient expression of someone who had dealt with far more dangerous adversaries than aggressive defense attorneys. When he finally spoke, his voice remained steady and controlled, despite the inflammatory nature of the accusation. Ma'am, this Medal of Honor was presented to me by the President of the United States on November 15, 2019, in a ceremony at the White House, attended by the families of the men whose lives were lost during the operation, for which I received this decoration. Sterling pressed her attack, sensing that Morrison's calm response might actually work against him if she could portray it as rehearsed or defensive. Mr. Morrison, anyone can make claims about ceremonies and presentations. What I'm asking is whether you have any documentation that proves you legitimately earned this medal, rather than simply acquiring it for theatrical purposes. Objection, Your Honor. Morrison's attorney called out. Counsel is harassing the witness and making accusations without foundation. Sustained, Judge Hayes ruled, but the damage had already been done. Sterling had successfully raised questions about Morrison's integrity that would be difficult to resolve through legal proceedings alone. Morrison reached slowly into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded document, placing it carefully on the witness stand beside him. This is the citation that accompanies the Medal of Honor, signed by the President and the Secretary of the Navy, describing the actions for which the decoration was awarded. Sterling approached the witness stand and took the document, scanning it quickly before shaking her head with obvious skepticism. Mr. Morrison, any document can be forged. What this jury needs to understand is that you're asking them to believe an extraordinary story about heroism that conveniently supports your current lawsuit against my client. Your Honor, Morrison's attorney interjected, I'd like to submit this citation as evidence, along with the official military records that document Mr. Morrison's service and the circumstances surrounding his Medal of Honor. Sterling waved dismissively. Your Honor, documents can be fabricated, especially when there's significant financial motivation to do so. What I'm suggesting is that Mr. Morrison is exploiting sympathy for military veterans to distract from the real issues in this case. Morrison's composure finally showed the first crack as he leaned slightly forward in his chair. Ma'am, 6 men died under my command because equipment failed when they needed it most. I'm not here for money or sympathy. I'm here because those men deserved better than what your client provided. Mr. Morrison, Sterling continued, her voice taking on a harder edge, isn't it true that you're a failed military officer who is using this fabricated Medal of Honor to compensate for an unremarkable career that ended in the deaths of the men you were supposed to protect? The question crossed every line of courtroom decorum and basic human decency. Morrison's attorney was on his feet immediately, but before he could voice his objection, something extraordinary began to happen in the gallery behind them. In the back rows of the courtroom, 6 men in Navy dress uniforms had been sitting quietly throughout the proceedings. They were active-duty Navy SEALs who had taken leave from their duties to attend this trial, not as required witnesses or expert consultants, but as men who had something important to say about the witness being attacked by Sterling's aggressive tactics. As Sterling's accusation echoed through the courtroom, the 6 SEALs rose to their feet in perfect unison, with the precision that characterized everything they did as elite military operators. Their movement was so synchronized and purposeful that it commanded immediate attention from everyone in the courtroom, including Judge Hayes, who looked up from her bench with surprise and curiosity. Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez stepped forward slightly from the group, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent courtroom. Your Honor, permission to address the court? Judge Hayes looked uncertain about the unusual request, but the gravity and respect in Rodriguez's voice suggested that something significant was about to happen. State your name and your relationship to these proceedings. Ma'am, Petty Officer First Class Miguel Rodriguez, United States Navy SEALs. I served under Commander Morrison's leadership during the operation in question, and I believe the court deserves to know the truth about what happened that day and about the man whose character is being questioned. Sterling immediately objected. Your Honor, this witness is not on any approved list and has no standing to interrupt these proceedings. But Rodriguez continued, his voice growing stronger as his 5 teammates moved to flank him in a show of solidarity that spoke louder than any legal argument. Your Honor, Commander Morrison didn't just earn his Medal of Honor. He earned it saving our lives when everything went wrong because of faulty equipment that should never have been approved for military use. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and gasps as people began to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Active-duty military personnel interrupting legal proceedings to defend their former commander against accusations they could not allow to stand unchallenged. Petty Officer Second Class Thompson stepped forward to join Rodriguez. Ma'am, when our communications equipment failed and our extraction was compromised, Commander Morrison made a choice that cost him his career but saved our lives. He could have followed protocol and abandoned the mission, but instead, He stayed behind to ensure we all made it home. Petty Officer First Class Williams added his voice to the growing chorus of testimony. Your Honor, the equipment failure wasn't just a technical problem, it was a catastrophic breakdown that left us trapped behind enemy lines with no way to call for help. Commander Morrison used himself as a diversion to draw enemy fire while we reached the extraction point. Chief Petty Officer Martinez, the senior enlisted man among the group, spoke with the authority of someone who had served with distinction for over 15 years. Ma'am, I've served with many officers during my career, but I've never seen the kind of leadership and personal courage that Commander Morrison demonstrated that day. When the situation became hopeless, he made decisions that saved 5 of us, even though it meant he couldn't save everyone. Sterling found herself in an impossible position. She had expected to discredit Morrison through aggressive questioning and implications of fraud, but instead, she had triggered a spontaneous testimonial from the very men whose lives Morrison had risked everything to save. Her legal strategy was collapsing in real time as authentic witnesses provided first-hand accounts that validated everything Morrison had claimed. Petty Officer Second Class Kim stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion, as he struggled to maintain the professional composure expected of active duty personnel in formal proceedings. Your Honor, the medal that lawyer is calling fake represents the moment when our commander chose to sacrifice his own safety so that we could go home to our families. Every one of us in this courtroom today owes our lives to the decisions he made when that equipment failed. Petty Officer First Class Santos, the youngest of the group, added his testimony with the conviction of someone who had witnessed heroism firsthand. Ma'am, Commander Morrison didn't just follow orders or stick to protocol. When everything went wrong, he became something more than a commanding officer. He became someone willing to die so that others could live. Judge Hayes realized that she was witnessing something far more significant than a legal dispute over product liability. The spontaneous testimony from the 6 SEALs had transformed the courtroom into something approaching a military tribunal, where honor, sacrifice, and truth were being weighed against legal maneuvering and corporate interests. Counsel, Judge Hayes addressed Sterling directly. In light of this testimony from military personnel who served with Mr. Morrison, do you wish to reconsider your accusations about the authenticity of his Medal of Honor? Sterling's face had indeed turned white, as the hook had promised, but not just from embarrassment. She was beginning to understand that her attack on Morrison's credibility had backfired catastrophically, providing the plaintiff's case with emotional testimony that no amount of legal argument could overcome. Morrison remained seated in the witness chair, visibly moved by the support of the men he had led, but maintaining the dignified composure that had characterized his entire testimony. When Judge Hayes asked if he wished to respond to the SEAL's statements, he stood slowly and faced the 6 men who had interrupted legal proceedings to defend his honor. Gentlemen, Morrison said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom, you honor me more than any medal could. But what happened that day wasn't about my heroism. It was about your courage, your training, and your commitment to completing the mission, even when everything went wrong. He turned to face the jury, his hands clasped behind his back in a military posture that seemed natural and automatic. The Medal of Honor I wear belongs to all of us, to the men who died, to the men who survived, and to everyone who has ever served, knowing that sometimes the equipment you depend on might fail when you need it most. Morrison reached up and carefully removed the Medal of Honor from around his neck, placing it gently on the witness stand, where everyone in the courtroom could see it clearly. This medal represents a moment when good people tried to do their duty with equipment that wasn't good enough. That's why we're here today. Not for money or glory, but to make sure that what happened to us doesn't happen to others. The gesture was so powerful and authentic that even Sterling found herself momentarily speechless. She had spent weeks preparing to attack Morrison's credibility, but the combined testimony of the six SEALs and Morrison's own humble response had created a narrative that no legal argument could challenge. Chief Petty Officer Martinez stepped forward once more, addressing the judge directly. "Your Honor, if I may, there's one more thing the court should know about Commander Morrison's Medal of Honor citation." Judge Hayes nodded for him to continue. "Ma'am, the citation mentions that Commander Morrison's actions saved the lives of 5 service members during a classified operation. What it doesn't mention is that he also stayed behind to protect and evacuate 3 wounded Afghan civilians who had been caught in the crossfire. He didn't have to do that. It wasn't part of the mission, but he couldn't leave them behind." The additional detail provided context that elevated Morrison's actions from military heroism to pure human decency under the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. Jury members visibly reacted to this information, several wiping away tears as they began to understand the full scope of what Morrison had sacrificed. Sterling realized that her entire defense strategy had not only failed, but had actually strengthened the plaintiff's case by providing a platform for authentic testimony about Morrison's character and the real consequences of her client's equipment failures. She had no choice but to retreat from her accusations and attempt to minimize the damage. "Your Honor," Sterling said, her voice lacking the confidence she had displayed earlier, "I withdraw my questions about Mr. Morrison's Medal of Honor and apologize to the court for any confusion my line of questioning may have caused." But Judge Hayes wasn't finished. "Miss Sterling, before we continue, I want to ensure that you understand the gravity of what has occurred here today. You have made serious accusations about the authenticity of a Medal of Honor, and those accusations have been refuted by first-hand witnesses to the events in question." The judge turned to address the 6 SEALs directly. "Gentlemen, while your interruption of these proceedings was highly irregular, your testimony has provided crucial context for understanding the witness and the events that brought us here today. Thank you for your service and for your courage in speaking truth to power." As the SEALs resumed their seats, the atmosphere in the courtroom had completely changed. What had begun as a routine product liability case had become something approaching a military tribunal, where concepts of honor, duty, and sacrifice carried more weight than legal technicalities or corporate liability calculations. Morrison's attorney seized the moment to redirect the focus toward the substantive issues in the case. "Mr. Morrison, please tell the jury what happened when the communication equipment provided by Defense Contractors United failed during your operation." For the next 2 hours, Morrison provided detailed testimony about equipment failures, design flaws, and corporate negligence that had contributed to the deaths of 6 Navy SEALs. But his words now carried the additional weight of proven credibility and established heroism that Sterling's attack had inadvertently reinforced. The trial continued for 3 more days, but the outcome was never in doubt. After the dramatic testimony that had validated Morrison's character and established the moral foundation for holding defense contractors United accountable for their failures, the jury returned a verdict awarding $50 million in damages, with the foreman specifically noting that Morrison's credibility and the testimony of the surviving SEALs had been decisive in their deliberations. More importantly, the case established legal precedents that would force defense contractors to implement stricter quality control standards for equipment provided to military personnel. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the reminder it provided about the importance of recognizing genuine heroism and the danger of cynical assumptions about military service and sacrifice. Sterling's aggressive attack on Morrison's Medal of Honor had backfired not just as a legal strategy, but as a demonstration of how prejudice and skepticism can blind us to the authentic courage that exists among those who serve others. For the 6 Navy SEALs who had interrupted legal proceedings to defend their former commander, the experience reinforced the bonds of loyalty and respect that military service creates among those who have faced life and death situations together. They had risked their careers by speaking out in a civilian court, but they had upheld principles that transcended legal procedures or military regulations. The story of Commander Morrison and the lawyer who learned not to question genuine heroism became more than just a courtroom drama. It became a reminder that some accomplishments are too sacred to be challenged by those who have never faced the tests that create real courage, and that truth ultimately prevails when authentic witnesses are willing to stand up and speak it.